The fuck? You're gonna confirm my age with a facial estimation? You're gonna tell me I'm old without even. You're gonna tell me I'm old just from fucking TikTok camera in it. Age estimation. Let's see it, baby. Age confirmed. Oh, I'm way older than 18, baby. Where I belong now. So yeah, apparently with like YouTube, you can't you know, play songs and stuff that are copyrighted. So I'm just gonna have to sing everything for you guys. What have you done? If we fall in love, thinking about me, baby, I know. Isn't that sweet? I guess so. Thinking about me, baby, I know. That's that me espresso. Talking about her, that's that me espresso. Isn't that sweet? I guess so. Thinking about me, baby, I know. Isn't that sweet? I guess so. Yeah, I don't know the words. I like the song though. So right now I'm just taking this piece of 7mm rod and I am handling up to the end of a piece of, looks like about 20 something millimeter rod. I'm doing this so that way I can have a chunk of clear glass on the end of this handle. Typically we're going to use 7mm rods for handles. Sometimes people go thinner, sometimes people go thicker. That's just kind of the tried and true go-to. You got that weld nice and welded. Let's try and even her up a bit. I want to make sure everything when you're working with glass is on axis. That's why we're continuously rotating the glass just to make sure everything is nice and on axis. Because when it's on axis, that means that every step that you take after that will be that much more likely to be perfect and in line and not be working on a piece down the road that you didn't start with a good foundation with. So you want to make sure things are on axis. Right now I'm using my rollers. Use the rollers to check for a nice even axis after you've done your weld. Sometimes you can feel it or just tell, but it's still nice to have the rollers to double check just in case it's slightly off. Now I'm tearing away the shitty glass at the end of this rod. Usually where glass has been cut or glass has been sawed, if there's any kind of harsh, jagged happenings to it at all, will usually create scuzzy areas. The scuzz are just kind of cloudy and not crystal clear. So I've gotten all the junk, so to speak, off the end of my rod. Melt that in, get it a little bit more evenly rounded. Again, you want things to be nice and even and symmetrical throughout the whole process. Symmetry makes your job and life easier down the road. Okay, so now I'm going to take this black color that has like a sparkle to it, and I'm going to coat this clear rod. You do this to preserve color because color is a lot more expensive than clear, and so you want to make sure that you don't waste a bunch of money making something solid clear color that doesn't need to be. Sometimes you do want something to be a solid clear color depending on the application, or a solid color with no clear underneath it. But this application, I do not need the inside of this prep that I'm making to be solid black. I just need the black to show up on the outside. And so I will save myself a couple bucks by investing a little bit of time. And it still takes a lot of time to gather this rod up into this formation. So it's not like I saved that much time by gathering a solid chunk of rod into this size rod. You know, going from 7 mil to like 20 something would take a minute to gather up anyways. So this kind of like painting on process takes about the same amount of time and saves you a lot of money. Especially when you're doing like several of these pieces of these prep sections for a project I'm working on. You know, just doing one wouldn't, you know, save you a couple bucks. But when you're making several of these sections and adding it to a piece and trying to give a collector a good deal, this is a way to make it more affordable without cutting any corners on quality. This is still going to be a very stable and very nice piece of glass. What's up, everybody? Welcome, welcome. If anybody has any questions about what I'm doing, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments. Let me turn this a little bit more for you so you can see what's going on. Thinking about me, baby, I know. Isn't that sweet? I guess so. Big flame, everybody likes a big flame. So down here, I'm starting to get some cracking on my clear rod because I did not evenly heat this whole rod before I started working on this. And so you'll get hot spots in the glass where you're working on it, but then several inches down away from the flame, it'll be much cooler. And if you don't manage that heat correctly, the glass will crack. Now, it's not detrimental at this point because I'm just making some pieces of prep. But if this was like a whole tube or a whole sculpture and I heated one side too long and didn't heat the other side consistently enough while trying to get the other side hot, one side would cool down, one side would get hot, and then the glass would crack right in the middle of those two heat differentials. Right now I'm just melting this color in to the piece of glass that I swiped it onto. You want to make sure it's all one uniform piece of glass. You don't want to see any sharp valleys or pits or angles or anything like that from where you've streaked on the color. You want it to be uniform, solid, even, and therefore no stress. Sharp angles in glass create stress. Smooth angles, smooth lines, smooth curvatures eliminate as much stress as possible. Okay, so it looks orange right now, but this is actually all black. So this is a color that is all black and it just looks orange due to the glow from the heat. I'll let it cool down here in a second and then you'll be able to see the actual black color that's underneath. It'll take a second. And since this is such a solid chunk of glass with so much heat in the core of it, from me heating it like that, it will hold on to this. It'll retain the heat for a pretty long period of time. And so it'll take a minute for this black to actually go back to just a flat black. You can still kind of see that red glow. There's an indicator that if I touched it right now, it would be very hot. Just touching it with a paper towel will light it. So don't want to touch that shit. All right, but you all saw the black. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm taking a color that I've pre-mixed down with a little bit of clear. It's a brown color. And so without mixing it with the clear, when I apply it to this, it's not gonna have much transparency. It's gonna be a solid brown. But since I've added half and half clear to it, when I streak it on here in splotches, it'll have some opacity or some transparency to it. But I want to make this very chaotic and like random splotches. So I'm basically just adding little dots, and then I'm just going to melt those dots around this piece of black. And I'm going to leave gaps in the black because I'm going to be essentially creating like a marbleized texture on this piece. And I want those black lines to come through in between all of the colors that I'm adding right now. There's different techniques and ways to create marbleized patterns in glass. This is just kind of a technique that I've found to be extremely chaotic, which is good because it doesn't create any uniformity. Sometimes when you want something to look like an organic material and you're applying it in patterns or sequences or rhythms, it starts to get a little, I don't know, like a little too uniform, too much pattern, too much consistency, and it looks less organic. So I like to go for the chaotic patterns, chaotic process, chaotic techniques when it comes to creating organic patterns for designs. Now, if I'm creating a wine goblet and I want it to sit flat and stand up straight and, you know, look symmetrical, then of course I'm going to apply a different ideology to the way that I work the glass. But for sculpting and for certain pattern works, it's almost better not to have the perfection or the symmetry. It's good to have a little bit of organic feel to your stuff. You know, it's how Bob Ross always said, happy accidents, dude. And so when you create a process that allows for more and more accidents that create organic feel and be as accidental and as less intentional as possible. Just flow with it, accept the accidents, and make it a happy accident. Work with the accident. Embrace the accident. Become the accident. I am an accident, y'all. Oh, that was hot. Yeah, sometimes the tools get hot too. Okay, so now I've worked that brown color into my black, and now I'm going to re-streak over the brown with this gold shiny color that has kind of like a little metallic luster to it, essentially. So I'm going to streak back over that brown. I want to cover most of the brown. What I want is for the brown, the edges of that brown to be exposed and cover this gold electrum color over most of the center points and kind of almost make it veiny on the, like where you just see veins of the brown on the outside. And again, I'm going to do this chaotically so that way there are thicker borders of that brown color underneath on some spots and thinner or non-exposed at all. And what I'm doing is I'm going to this larger flame to melt the glass in faster and more evenly. It's a lot hotter, it makes me sweat more, uses up more oxygen and fuel, but the time is where it's at. You want to save yourself time and energy twin workload. And if you have to spend a few more dollars on oxygen to get a hotter flame, or you have to spend more money on a torch to get a bigger flame, then it is exactly what you should be doing with glass blowing, because this shit takes time and energy, and you need to conserve as much of both as you possibly can to be successful. Alright, and again, just trying to get that back on a nice even axis. I want all this to be nice and even. And now with this organic kind of flow of making something marbleized, you know, the axis doesn't have to be as perfect, because you're not really trying to base things off of the perfection of how this pattern. Now, if I was creating a pattern where it was very precise and everything was lined up and perpendicular to each other and parallel to each other, and I wanted to apply that to something else, then I would need to make sure this is on axis. But this is kind of a chaotic pattern, and so it's not as crucial. But due to just habit and muscle memory, I've tried to force myself to always keep things on axis. It just feels and looks better and keeps my head focused on the glass and not this like wonky wobbly shit flopping around. So now I'm basically going to take this green rod and I'm going to swirl these colors all together, and I'm going to do it in a consistent swirling method, so that way most of the swirls are kind of, you know, spiraling in the same direction. The terminations kind of come out in the same way, or at least in the same kind of clockwise, actually counterclockwise rotation. And I'll still do this chaotically. I'm not trying to do perfect spirals. I'm just making sure these swirls are all in the same direction as I go around. And so what that kind of does, if you go one direction and then back in one direction, you start to see where it doesn't create a marbleized pattern. It looks like you mushed a bunch of colors together like a 5-year-old. But when you kind of like grab one swirl and swirl it into the next in the same direction, it starts to all become a little more seamless, and you have trouble seeing where the swirling pattern began, and it all of a sudden just becomes one big marbleized uniform bunch of swirls. Okay, so now that I've made all my swirls, I'm gonna melt that in a little bit. And you can do this with as many color layers as you want. The only thing to keep in mind is certain colors are not going to work well together. So, you know, as part of the experimentation process is seeing what colors don't work well together. You can do some independent research and glass blowing groups, Facebook groups, forums, stuff like that, and kind of get an idea of like which colors to immediately avoid working together, because so many people have had bad experiences with them. But there's just new colors coming out all the time, and it's hard to see or find information on like a color that was created 20 years ago being worked with a color that was created less than 2 years ago. And so you just got to do a little experimentation. That's really what it is. So it looks red and orange right now, but these colors are actually black and brown. So you've got a black undercoat and then a brown and kind of goldish color swirl going on here. Once this stops cooling, or once this is done cooling off, or it's cooled down a little bit, it won't be as so orange, and you'll be able to see the colors coming out through it. Starting to get some of the golds and browns there now. It's like a shiny goldish brown too. And now you can see the marbleization of the color through the black. Everybody, y'all hit a like if you like that shit. So then I'm going to go back through, since it's all kind of marbleized now, and I'm just going to hit it with some like streaks that create that, like, I don't know, natural marbleization, like where it's like a less swirly and more just like natural stone chaos. And I'm going to try not to terminate those lines within the middle of the piece. I want them to become, I don't want those terminations, meaning like where I stop my pull. I don't want that to leave a little dot and then that dot beat up and create like a ball of color on like a bunch of thin lines. You want that like thin striation of line look. You need to like swipe it all the way up to the top, all the way to the bottom, and not allow beads of glass to land on the surface. I have a few, but I don't think they're going to affect my pattern at all. Most of them are at the end. All right, so I'm melting this all back in one last time, and then I'm going to throw this in my kiln. I'll walk y'all over to the kiln to show you what the kiln be all about, and yeah, then I'll show y'all the final product of what this will look like once it's cooled down, because I've already made a couple pieces of this specific prep. And so once it's cooled down, or once I throw this in the kiln, I'll show you pieces that I've already made and cooled down. So what I'm doing right now is I'm doing what they call kind of a gather. I'm not going to gather it into a perfect ball, but I'm letting the glass all mush into itself, creating a lot tighter. If there's any air bubbles, it's going to make those air bubbles, more spherical and not lines, which create stress. A spherical air bubble in glass is fine, but an air bubble with lines or sharp angles is going to create stress. So by doing that, you basically are pushing all the glass together, and it's forcing those air bubbles into small little circles, and then you slowly droop it back down into place, and it'll keep those small circles in the inside retained, but it'll slump the glass, de-stressing it. And you just keep spinning it. If you ever stop spinning it, it'll get off the axis. You got to basically keep spinning it until you get to the point where you can stop seeing it move. Now let's go on over. Let's go on over to yeah, that's the 411 on how to create marbleized textures on glass, or just a general breakdown of like what glass color looks like, how it melts, things like that. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer questions. I have not seen any. Looking. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions, but if anybody has any questions about what I'm doing, please feel free to ask. I'd love to answer them. Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to do, is show y'all how to do the marbleized pattern. Now I'm going to show y'all what it looks like after it's all done. So this is what it looks like completely finished. So that's the finished marbleization of these three colors: black, gold, brown. And then I have this green color that I swirled it all together with that has some UV properties to it. So when you hit this with a UV light, a strong enough UV light, you'll see little striations of UV. It's not actually UV green. It's a green color with the UV pink. So you'll see like a pink striations running through all this. Yeah, I just wanted this to look like some kind of weird marbleized, mineral or gemstone. Again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. Love answering questions, love educating people on glass art. Or if you just like this content, hit the little like button, follow me, however you can support. I'm trying to spread the good word of the glass gods, doing the Lord's work. We'll show this off for YouTube too. I got YouTube stream going on over here. Camera sucks. But yeah, we've also, basically this is going to be a bigger part of a project where I'm going to turn these into like little boulders, like little like giant rocks, and then the rocks are going to be set all around this like portal. So this is essentially a portal that's going to have these mineral giant boulders all the way around the archway of the portal, and they'll be connected by this like blue UV glass, like energy looking, like almost like the energy is keeping the rocks in the portal all intact. So that's the piece that I'm working on right now. This is a cool cat glass collab. you follow Cool Cat Glass on Instagram or any other socials, he makes this amazing. Wait, this might not be Cool Cat. Yeah, this is Cool Cat, I think. All right, well, that's pretty much it. All right, well,